The stars shimmered outside the massive windows of the assembly hall on Nexara Prime. Inside the grand chamber, representatives from 47 different species gathered for another routine session. The hall was magnificent, with crystalline pillars that caught and reflected light in rainbow patterns across the polished floor. At the center sat Ambassador Claire Morrison, Earth's chief representative to the Galactic Coalition. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her face showed the calm confidence of someone who had spent 3 decades building bridges between worlds. Claire adjusted her diplomatic robes and glanced at the agenda on her datapad. Nothing unusual today, just trade agreements and resource allocation discussions. She allowed herself a small smile. 300 years of peace between humanity and the galaxy had been built on moments like these. Quiet diplomacy replacing the chaos of war. The other species in the coalition saw humans as gentle merchants, skilled negotiators who preferred words over weapons. That reputation had taken generations to cultivate, and Claire intended to preserve it. High Chancellor Vorak of the Kryn Empire entered the chamber with his usual theatrical flair. The reptilian leader stood over 7 feet tall, his scaled skin gleaming dark green under the lights. His eyes were cold and calculating, the eyes of a predator who had never known defeat. Behind him walked Commander Zarathel, his most trusted military advisor. She was smaller than Vorak, but no less intimidating, with scars marking her face from dozens of battles. The Kryn controlled the largest military force in the coalition, and they never let anyone forget it. Claire watched Vorak take his seat across the chamber. The Kryn had been pushing for more military authority within the coalition for years. Every session brought new proposals, new demands wrapped in the language of collective security. So far, the other species had resisted, but Claire could sense the tide shifting. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Vorak knew how to exploit it. The session began with standard reports. Trade Minister Kellen of the Aquarii gave an update on commercial routes. Ambassador Lyria of the Vex Collective presented efficiency statistics for resource distribution. Claire listened politely, making notes and preparing her own reports. Everything seemed normal until Vorak requested the floor for a special proposal. The chamber grew quiet as Vorak stood. His voice carried across the hall with practiced authority. He spoke of threats from beyond coalition space, of dangers lurking in unexplored regions. He painted pictures of hostile forces that could attack at any moment. Then he presented his solution, the Unified Military Protocol. Under this new system, every coalition species would contribute military resources to a centralized defense force. The force would be commanded by the Kryn naturally, since they had the most experience in military matters. All member worlds would be required to submit to regular inspections of their defensive capabilities to ensure everyone was contributing fairly. Claire felt her stomach tighten. She had known this was coming eventually, but the timing caught her off guard. Around the chamber, she could see other ambassadors shifting uncomfortably. Some looked intrigued, others concerned. Vorak had chosen his moment well, presenting the proposal when tensions were high and species were feeling vulnerable. She requested the floor and stood to address the chamber. Her voice was calm and measured as she thanked Vorak for his concerns about coalition security. Then she gently pointed out that the coalition charter explicitly protected each species' right to maintain sovereign military control. The charter had been written specifically to prevent any single species from dominating others. Mandatory inspections and centralized command would violate those fundamental principles. Vorak's response was swift and cutting. He questioned why Earth would object unless they had something to hide. His tone suggested that humanity was being selfish, benefiting from Kryn protection while contributing nothing in return. He gestured dramatically, asking the chamber to consider how many Kryn soldiers had died defending coalition space, while humans sat safely behind trade routes. The accusation was unfair and inaccurate, but it landed with devastating effect. Other ambassadors began to murmur. Some nodded in agreement with Vorak. Claire could see the careful work of years beginning to unravel. She tried to explain that Earth maintained adequate defenses and contributed to coalition security in many ways. But Vorak interrupted her. He demanded proof. If Earth had nothing to hide, they should welcome immediate military inspection. Let the Kryn verify that human defenses were sufficient and that humanity was not hiding weapons that could threaten other species. The debate grew heated. Ambassador Lyria called for order, her logical mind seeking a rational compromise. Trade Minister Kellen spoke in humanity's defense, reminding the Chamber of Earth's long history of peaceful cooperation. But fear had taken root, and fear made people willing to sacrifice principles for the illusion of safety. When the vote was called, Claire watched in dismay as species after species approved the inspection protocol. The measure passed by a narrow margin, but it passed. Vorak smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. He announced that the Kryn would begin with Earth, since humanity had been the most vocal in opposition. The inspection fleet would depart within days. Claire felt the weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders. She maintained her diplomatic composure as the session adjourned, but inside she was calculating the consequences. In her private quarters that evening, Claire sat before a secure communication terminal. The encrypted channel connected her directly to Admiral Nathan Cross, commander of Earth's hidden military force. His weathered face appeared on the screen, the face of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for a moment he hoped would never come. Claire explained the situation quickly and efficiently. The Kryn were coming to inspect Earth's defenses, and they would not stop at the obvious installations. Commander Thel was thorough and suspicious. She would search until she found the truth. Admiral Cross listened in silence. When Claire finished, she made her recommendation. Full disclosure before the Kryn discovered it on their own. Reveal the fleet voluntarily. Control the narrative. Explain the historical context. Perhaps honesty would prevent the catastrophe she could see approaching. The Admiral's response was immediate and final. One word that ended the discussion. Negative. The fleet would remain hidden. Earth's secret would be preserved for as long as possible. If the Kryn discovered the truth, they would deal with it then. Cross believed that revealing the fleet voluntarily would be seen as a threat, an attempt to intimidate the coalition. Better to maintain the fiction of human weakness until forced to do otherwise. Claire disagreed but understood the reasoning. Sometimes there were no good choices, only different kinds of risk. She closed the communication channel and sat in darkness, staring at the stars beyond her window. Somewhere out there beyond the orbit of Pluto, thousands of warships waited in cold silence. The Earth Defense Fleet, humanity's most carefully guarded secret, ships that had been built in the fires of ancient wars, preserved through centuries of peace, maintained by automated systems that never slept. The galaxy believed humanity was peaceful by nature. The truth was far more complicated. Humans had learned peace the hard way, through wars so devastating they nearly destroyed their species. The fleet was a reminder of what they had been and a promise of what they would never become again. But it was also insurance, protection against a universe that did not always reward the peaceful. For 300 years, humanity had hidden its true strength, hoping never to need it. Now that secret was in danger, and Claire could not predict what would happen when it was revealed. She thought about the young officers serving on civilian vessels, the generation that had only known peace. She thought about Captain Lisa Grant, who commanded the merchant ship Horizon's Edge with skill and dedication. Lisa represented everything humanity had become, far removed from the warriors of old. How would her generation respond when they learned the truth about their history? How would the galaxy respond when they discovered that the gentle merchants were descended from some of the most effective warriors ever to exist? Claire closed her eyes and tried to rest, but sleep would not come. The countdown had begun. In days, the Kryn inspection fleet would arrive. In weeks or months, they would discover what humanity had hidden. And then everything would change. The age of secrets was ending, and Claire Morrison could only hope that what came next would not be the age of war she had spent her life trying to prevent. Outside her window, the stars continued to shine, indifferent to the troubles of the species that traveled between them. The galaxy was vast and ancient, and it had seen civilizations rise and fall countless times before. Soon it would witness another turning point, another moment when the balance of power shifted. The sleeping giant was about to be awakened, and the universe would learn an old truth that humanity had known for centuries. Peace is not the absence of strength, but the choice not to use it. The Kryn inspection fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, like metal predators entering new hunting grounds. 6 warships, each one a monument to military power. their hulls painted in the dark green and black colors of the Kryn Empire. Commander Zara Thel stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, studying the sensor readouts with careful attention. Earth looked small and vulnerable from this distance, a blue marble orbiting an ordinary yellow star. She had inspected dozens of worlds in her career, and none of them had ever surprised her. Captain Lisa Grant received the notification while the Horizon's Edge was docked at Luna Station. Her orders were clear and unwelcome. She was to escort the Kryn fleet and provide them access to human facilities. The assignment felt wrong, like inviting wolves into the henhouse, but orders were orders. Lisa was 32 years old and had spent her entire adult life in space. She had grown up during the golden age of human expansion, when the greatest danger was equipment failure, and the worst conflict was trade disputes. War was something from history books, stories her grandfather told about times she could barely imagine. Her chief engineer, Lieutenant Sam Torres, joined her on the bridge as they prepared to undock. Sam was a few years older than Lisa, with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had fixed every type of mechanical problem at least twice. He had served in the reserves back when Earth still maintained a small active military presence. That experience gave him a perspective Lisa sometimes envied. He understood things about conflict and danger that her generation had never needed to learn. The meeting with Commander Thel went exactly as Lisa expected. The Kryn officer was cold and professional, barely acknowledging Lisa's presence. Thel made it clear that the Horizon's Edge was there to provide access, nothing more. Her tone suggested that she considered humans barely worth her time, certainly not worth basic courtesy. Lisa swallowed her irritation and maintained diplomatic composure. Starting an incident would not help anyone. The inspection began with Earth's orbital defense platforms. These were modest installations, designed to protect against asteroids and debris rather than military threats. The Kryn scanned them thoroughly, documenting every weapon system and shield generator. Thel seemed satisfied that these defenses were inadequate for anything beyond basic protection. She made notes on her datapad with what looked like satisfaction. Everything confirmed what she already believed about human weakness. Next came the patrol vessels that monitored the inner system. Small ships with light weapons, suitable for customs enforcement and rescue operations but useless in real combat. Again, the Kryn found exactly what they expected. Commander Thel reported back to Chancellor Vorak that preliminary findings supported their assessment. Earth's military capabilities were negligible, barely sufficient for self-defense and certainly no threat to anyone. But Thel was not someone who took things at face value. She had not risen to her position by accepting easy answers. Something nagged at her, a detail that did not quite fit. Earth's power consumption patterns were odd. The planet and its orbital facilities used less energy than they should for a civilization of this size. The difference was small, easy to miss, but Thel noticed it. Power was being diverted somewhere, used for something that was not visible in the inner system. She ordered her ships to extend their sensor sweeps, looking beyond the obvious installations. The scans picked up faint energy signatures originating from the outer system, far beyond the orbit of Neptune. The signatures were weak and intermittent, barely detectable, but they were there. Thel felt her instincts sharpening. She had found something the humans wanted to hide. When she requested permission to extend the inspection to the Kuiper Belt, Lisa hesitated. The pause was brief, barely a second, but it was enough. Thel saw the flicker of concern in the human captain's eyes. Whatever was out there, Earth did not want the Kryn to find it. That hesitation told Thel everything she needed to know. She ordered her fleet to proceed without waiting for authorization. Lisa protested, explaining that the outer system was restricted space, and the inspection mandate did not extend that far. Thel ignored her. The Horizon's Edge moved to block the Kryn advance, a merchant vessel trying to stand against warships. It was a brave gesture, but ultimately meaningless. The Kryn ships brushed past with ease, their superior power and speed making resistance impossible. Lisa could only watch helplessly as they continued toward the source of the energy signatures. The Kryn fleet crossed the orbit of Neptune and continued outward, following the energy readings. Hours passed as they traveled deeper into the cold darkness beyond the planets. Thel stood on her bridge, staring at the sensor screens with growing anticipation. Whatever humans were hiding out here, it was big. The energy signatures were getting stronger, indicating massive power generation on a scale that should not exist in an uninhabited region. Then her sensors officer called out a contact. Something large was ahead, hidden in the shadow of Pluto. As they drew closer, the sensors began resolving details. Thel felt her blood go cold as the impossible appeared on her screens. A facility enormous in scale, its structure spreading across hundreds of kilometers. Around it, arranged in perfect formation, were ships. Thousands of ships. Capital vessels that dwarfed anything the Kryn had ever built. Carriers large enough to house entire fleets. Weapons platforms capable of devastating firepower. All dormant, all waiting, all maintained in perfect readiness. The Earth Defense Fleet. Humanity's secret. The largest military force in the known galaxy, hidden beyond the outer planets for 3 centuries. Thel had seen many fleets in her career, had commanded battle groups that conquered worlds. But she had never seen anything like this. The scope was staggering, the implications terrifying. Everything the Kryn believed about humanity was wrong. The gentle merchants were not weak. They had simply chosen not to show their strength. A communication channel opened, overriding Thel's systems. A human face appeared on her screen, older than Captain Grant but with the same calm confidence. Admiral Nathan Cross identified himself as commander of the facility. His voice was steady and professional as he explained the situation. The fleet had been dormant for centuries, preserved from humanity's violent past. When humans joined the coalition, they chose to seek peace genuinely. The fleet was never meant to be a threat, merely insurance against a dangerous universe. Thel recovered from her shock and responded with military authority. She demanded that Earth decommission this fleet immediately. The existence of such power violated the spirit of the coalition, regardless of what the charter technically allowed. Cross refused. The fleet was Earth's sovereign property, and humans had every right to maintain defensive capabilities. He pointed out that the Kryn themselves maintained massive military forces. Why should humanity be held to a different standard? The standoff intensified. Thel, feeling threatened and humiliated, made a critical error. She ordered her ships to power weapons and demanded that Cross surrender control of the facility. It was meant to be an intimidating gesture, a demonstration that the Kryn would not tolerate deception, but it crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Threatening Earth's home territory was an act that could not be ignored. Admiral Cross gave Thel one warning. His voice carried no anger, only absolute certainty. Stand down immediately or face consequences. Thel refused, believing her 6 warships were enough to enforce Kryn authority. She had no idea what she had just triggered. A single defense platform activated. The weapons system came online with terrifying speed. In 3 seconds, it locked onto every Kryn vessel, calculated optimal firing solutions for each target, and transmitted the complete targeting data to Thel's command ship. The message was crystal clear. Her entire fleet could be destroyed before they fired a single shot. The humans were not issuing threats or bluffing. They were demonstrating capability with surgical precision. Thel stared at the data flooding her screens. The firing solutions were perfect, accounting for every variable, exploiting every weakness in Kryn ship design. If the platform opened fire, her fleet would cease to exist. She thought of her crew, the thousands of Kryn under her command who had followed her orders into this confrontation. Pride was not worth their lives. She ordered a full withdrawal. Her ships powered down weapons and began retreating from the system. The shame of backing down burned in her chest, but survival took precedence over honor. As her fleet escaped to safe distance, Thel transmitted her findings to Chancellor Vorak. The humans had deceived the entire coalition. They possessed the power to dominate the galaxy but had chosen to hide it. The question now was not whether humanity was a threat, but what the coalition would do about it. On Earth, emergency meetings convened in every government building. Ambassador Morrison argued passionately for immediate transparency. Tell the coalition the truth, explain the context, rely on centuries of peaceful coexistence to prove humanity's good intentions. Admiral Cross disagreed with equal conviction. Revealing the fleet's full capabilities would only escalate tensions. Better to maintain what secrecy remained and prepare for the worst. President Helen Carter listened to both arguments, weighing options that all seemed to lead toward. Chancellor Vorak called an emergency session of the Assembly of Worlds within hours of receiving Commander Thel's report. The news spread through the coalition like wildfire, and by the time delegates gathered in the Grand Chamber on Nexara Prime, every species knew the basic facts. Humanity had hidden a massive military fleet. The gentle merchants were not what they seemed. Fear rippled through the assembly like a physical presence, thick and suffocating. Vorak orchestrated the revelation with calculated precision. He presented Thel's findings carefully, emphasizing certain details while omitting others. He showed images of the human fleet, the massive warships that dwarfed Kryn vessels. He highlighted the weapons platforms capable of destroying entire battle groups. He painted humanity as deceivers who had infiltrated the coalition, while secretly maintaining the means to threaten every species in the galaxy. His presentation was designed not to inform but to terrify, and it achieved that goal perfectly. Ambassador Claire Morrison stood to address the assembly, knowing her words would determine humanity's fate. She looked around the chamber at faces that had once been friendly, but now showed suspicion and fear. She began with history, explaining the devastating wars that nearly destroyed Earth before humans learned the value of peace. The fleet was not built for conquest, she said, but as a reminder of what they had overcome. Humanity joined the coalition seeking genuine cooperation, and their 3 centuries of peaceful behavior proved their intentions. But fear had already poisoned the well. Ambassador Lyria of the Vex Collective interrupted with cold logic. If humanity truly sought peace, why hide such military power? The deception itself proved untrustworthiness. Other delegates nodded in agreement. Trade Minister Kellen tried to speak in Earth's defense, reminding the assembly of humanity's contributions to coalition prosperity and stability. His words were drowned out by voices demanding action. Vorak seized the moment. He proposed a resolution demanding Earth's complete disarmament within 60 days. The fleet must be decommissioned under Kryn supervision to ensure compliance. Any refusal would be treated as a hostile act, justifying military enforcement. The proposal was extreme, essentially an ultimatum backed by the threat of war. Yet to Morrison's horror, many delegates supported it. Species that had once valued human friendship now feared human power more than they valued human alliance. The debate stretched for hours. Some species argued for moderation, suggesting compromise solutions that would allow Earth to maintain limited defenses under coalition oversight. Others demanded immediate action, insisting that no single species should possess such overwhelming military advantage. The assembly was fracturing along lines of fear and self-interest. Vorak had succeeded in turning the galaxy against humanity. When the vote finally came, the resolution passed by a narrow majority. Earth had 60 days to begin systematic decommissioning of the defense fleet under Kryn supervision, or face military enforcement. Ambassador Lyria abstained from voting, her logic finding no clear path through the emotional chaos. Trade Minister Kellen voted against the measure, but his opposition was not enough. The galaxy had spoken and the message was clear. Disarm or face war. Morrison returned to Earth carrying the ultimatum like a death sentence. She went directly to an emergency cabinet meeting where President Helen Carter had assembled the government's senior leadership. Admiral Cross joined via secure communication from the Outer System facility. The tension in the room was palpable as Morrison delivered the assembly's decision. President Carter opened the floor for discussion. Her Secretary of Peace, Walter Green, argued strongly for compliance. The fleet was a relic from a darker age, he said, and humanity's future lay in cooperation, not military might. Disarming would demonstrate good faith and preserve Earth's place in the coalition. Other civilian ministers agreed, pointing out that war with the coalition would be catastrophic regardless of Earth's military strength. No one could win such a conflict. Admiral Cross responded from his remote location, his voice carrying the weight of military reality. Surrendering humanity's only deterrent would leave Earth vulnerable to species like the Kryn, who respected only strength. The fleet was built to protect humanity, and abandoning it would betray everyone who had sacrificed to create it. Fleet Commander Jacob Stone, standing beside Cross, added that the Kryn would not stop at disarmament. Vorak sought domination, and compliance would only encourage further demands. Dr. Peter Huang presented historical analysis from the Coalition archives. He had studied hundreds of species and their fates within the galactic community. Every species that disarmed under external pressure eventually faced subjugation or extinction. Power vacuums were always filled, he explained, and nature abhorred weakness. If Earth gave up the fleet, another power would rise to exploit that vulnerability. Probably the Kryn. Captain Lisa Grant attended the meeting as a representative of the officer corps. She spoke for her generation, the young people who had only known peace. The idea of war horrified her, she admitted, but she had witnessed Kryn arrogance firsthand. She had seen how they treated species they perceived as weak. Compliance would not earn respect, only contempt. Sometimes, she concluded reluctantly, the only way to preserve peace was to be strong enough that others feared to break it. The debate continued late into the night. President Carter listened to all perspectives, weighing impossible choices. Comply and risk subjugation. Refuse and trigger war. Try to negotiate and watch the deadline expire while the galaxy's patience ran out. Every option led toward disaster in different forms. Then Dr. Huang presented intelligence that changed the calculation. His contacts within the Coalition archives had intercepted encrypted Kryn communications. Vorak's true plan was revealed in those messages. The Chancellor did not want Earth to disarm. He wanted Earth to refuse so he could justify military action, but his goal was not destruction. Vorak intended to seize the human fleet intact. If the Kryn could capture humanity's weapons and technology, they would become the dominant power in the galaxy. The ultimatum was not about security. It was about conquest. The revelation shifted the debate. Compliance would not prevent war, only determine its timing and terms. Vorak had already decided to move against Earth. The only question was whether humanity would face that aggression from a position of strength or weakness. When President Carter finally called for a decision, the choice had become clear. Earth would not disarm. They would defend themselves. But Carter added a critical component. Before refusing the ultimatum outright, Earth would offer one final diplomatic solution: allow neutral observers from non-Kryn species to verify that Earth's fleet posed no aggressive threat and would only be used defensively. Grant access to independent inspectors who could confirm that humanity sought only to protect itself. If the Coalition refused this reasonable compromise, then the blame for what followed would rest with those who chose conflict over verification. The proposal was transmitted to the Assembly within hours. Ambassador Morrison presented it with every skill she had developed over 3 decades of diplomacy. She emphasized humanity's continued desire for peace, their willingness to provide transparency, and their hope that reason would prevail. The proposal was fair, modest, and obviously genuine. It should have been accepted immediately. Vorak's response destroyed any remaining hope for peaceful resolution. He declared the proposal insufficient and called it another attempt at deception. He reminded the Assembly that Earth had already proven untrustworthy by hiding the fleet for centuries. No amount of inspection could guarantee future intentions. The only acceptable outcome was complete disarmament. Anything less would be considered a violation of Coalition law justifying military enforcement. Then Vorak made the declaration that sealed humanity's fate. He announced that the Kryn Armada was already mobilizing to enforce the Assembly's resolution. 300 warships were gathering at the border of Kryn space, preparing to advance on the Sol system. Earth had 10 days to comply fully or face the consequences. The Armada would arrive ready to impose the Assembly's will by force if necessary. The galaxy held its breath. Some species protested Vorak's aggressive timeline and his unilateral military action. Others stayed silent, afraid to oppose the Kryn or secretly hoping to benefit from Earth's destruction. A few quietly contacted Earth offering support, though none were willing to provide military assistance. Trade Minister Kellen sent a private message to Ambassador Morrison, expressing his regret and shame at what the Coalition had become. On Earth, President Carter addressed her people. She spoke calmly and clearly about the choice they faced. Humanity had sought peace genuinely, but peace could not be purchased with surrender to tyranny. The fleet that had slept for 3 centuries would awaken. Earth would defend itself, and they would show the galaxy that humanity's choice of peace was not weakness but strength under control. When that control was threatened, they would demonstrate what they had chosen not to use all these years. Admiral Cross issued the command that echoed across the solar system. Wake the fleet. In the facility beyond Pluto, dormant systems began to stir. Power plants that had idled for centuries ignited. Weapons that had never been fired charged their capacitors. Ships The facility beyond Pluto transformed from tomb to hive in a matter of days. Admiral Nathan Cross stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched through the viewports as his fleet came to life. Warships that had floated dark and silent for 3 centuries now blazed with light and power. Crews moved through corridors that had known only vacuum and cold, bringing warmth and purpose back to vessels built for war. The awakening was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Fleet Commander Jacob Stone coordinated the massive undertaking from the operations center. He prioritized capital ships and carriers first, knowing they would form the backbone of any defensive strategy. Smaller vessels were activated in waves, with destroyers and cruisers coming online as crews became available. The logistics were staggering, but Stone had planned for this moment his entire career. Every ship had maintained readiness protocols. Every system had been tested regularly by automated drones. The fleet was old but not obsolete. It was ready. Captain Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the destroyer Valiant for the first time and felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. The ship was smaller than the massive capital vessels, but still impressive. 300 meters of sleek, deadly design. Lieutenant Sam Torres worked beside her at the tactical station, familiarizing himself with weapon systems he had only studied in theory. The crew was a mixture of veterans who had served decades ago and young officers pulled from civilian service. They drilled constantly, running simulation after simulation, preparing for combat that felt both inevitable and impossible. Dr. Peter Huang worked with military strategists to analyze everything known about Kryn tactics and capabilities. The Kryn were powerful but predictable. They favored overwhelming firepower and direct assault, believing superior numbers guaranteed victory. Their formations were traditional and rigid, designed for battles where both sides stood and traded blows until one side broke. Huang identified weaknesses in their doctrine and developed strategies to exploit them. Speed, maneuverability, and coordination would be humanity's advantages against Kryn's strength. Meanwhile, Ambassador Claire Morrison and Trade Minister Kellen worked desperately to rally support among neutral species. Many were sympathetic, but feared Kryn retaliation if they aided Earth. The Vex Collective maintained strict neutrality, with Ambassador Lyria explaining that logic dictated non-involvement. But a few smaller species quietly offered assistance. The Aquari provided intelligence on Kryn fleet movements. The Skyborn opened their space lanes to human supply vessels. The Crystalline Consortium agreed to provide resources. It was not military support, but it demonstrated that not all the galaxy had abandoned humanity. Morrison broadcast a message to every species in the coalition. She spoke without notes, her voice carrying the passion of someone fighting for survival. She explained humanity's history again, but this time with details she had never shared publicly. She described the wars that killed billions, the weapons that scarred Earth's surface the moment when humanity teetered on the edge of extinction before choosing peace. The fleet was not a tool of conquest, she said. It was a memorial to lessons learned in blood. Humanity preserved those weapons not to threaten others, but to never forget what war truly cost. Some listened. Some understood. But Vorak's propaganda machine had done its work well. Too many species believed the lies. Convinced that humanity was dangerous and deceptive, fear was easier than trust, and many chose the easy path. Morrison finished her broadcast knowing she had reached some hearts but changed few minds. The battle would be decided not by words but by actions. By day 8, the Earth Defense Fleet had reached 70% operational capacity. Admiral Cross reviewed his forces with Fleet Commander Stone and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. The fleet was magnificent, exactly what humanity needed to defend itself. But it represented so much more than military capability. It was proof that humanity had not changed as much as they claimed. The capacity for violence remained, just sleeping beneath the surface. The battle line formed around the Defiance, 12 other capital ships taking their positions. Each vessel was a fortress capable of independent operation, but far more effective as a coordinated force. Behind them, 6 carrier groups prepared to launch strike craft. The carriers were enormous, each one capable of deploying hundreds of fighters and bombers. The small craft would be crucial against the Kryn's numerical advantage, striking fast and withdrawing before heavy weapons could target them. Destroyers like the Valiant formed the outer screen, positioned to intercept enemy scouts and protect the larger vessels from flanking attacks. Cruisers provided heavy firepower and fleet coordination, their advanced sensor systems creating a tactical picture for every commander. Support vessels ensured the fleet could operate independently for months if necessary, though everyone hoped the conflict would be resolved much faster. Admiral Cross addressed the entire fleet through open channels. His voice reached every ship and every crew member preparing for combat. He did not speak of glory or revenge. Instead, he talked about protection and necessity. They fought not because they wanted war, but because they refused to surrender their freedom. The galaxy had given them a choice between submission and resistance, and humanity chose to stand. Every person in the fleet understood what was at stake: Earth's survival, humanity's right to exist on their own terms, and the principle that peace required the strength to defend it. On day 10, long-range sensors detected the approaching Kryn Armada, 300 warships organized in traditional battle formations, advancing toward the Sol system with steady purpose. Chancellor Vorak commanded from his flagship Dominion, supremely confident that numbers would overwhelm human resistance. Commander Zarathel stood beside him, studying tactical displays and feeling uneasy despite their apparent advantage. She remembered the demonstration at the outer facility. She had seen human precision and capability firsthand. Unlike Vorak, she did not underestimate their opponent. As the Kryn fleet penetrated the solar system, their sensors began detecting the human defensive formation. The readings confused them initially. The ships were arranged in patterns that made no traditional sense. They were spread out, not concentrated for maximum firepower. Their formations seemed designed for movement rather than static defense. Thel recognized the strategy immediately. The humans would not fight the way the Kryn expected. They would use speed and coordination, striking at vulnerabilities rather than matching strength against strength. Vorak broadcast his final demand on open channels: surrender the fleet immediately or be destroyed. He spoke with absolute certainty, convinced that victory was inevitable. 300 warships against perhaps 50 human vessels. The mathematics seemed simple and decisive. He gave Earth 1 hour to comply before beginning his attack. Admiral Cross listened to the demand without expression. Then he opened a response channel and delivered humanity's answer. His voice was calm and steady, carrying none of Vorak's bluster or pride. He explained that Earth sought no war with the Kryn or anyone else. But neither would humanity surrender to tyranny disguised as law. The fleet existed to protect Earth, and it would fulfill that purpose. He offered Vorak one chance: turn back now, and both sides could walk away from this confrontation. Continue, and the Kryn would learn why humanity had hidden such power. Vorak laughed. The sound carried mockery and contempt. He cut the channel and ordered his fleet to advance to attack positions. The Kryn warships moved forward in precise formation, weapons charging, shields at maximum. They expected human surrender or quick defeat. What they received was neither. Admiral Cross gave the order that changed everything: all ships weapons free, engage at will. The words rippled through the fleet like electricity. Every captain acknowledged and began executing their assigned roles. The Earth Defense Fleet, dormant for 3 centuries, was finally unleashed. The battle that would determine humanity's fate and reshape the galactic balance of power was about to begin. Captain Lisa Grant watched her tactical display as targeting solutions appeared. The Valiant and her sister destroyers would strike first, hitting the Kryn flanks to disrupt their formation. Behind them, carrier groups launched strike craft in waves so dense they appeared as clouds on sensors. Thousands of fighters and bombers accelerated toward the enemy, their pilots ready to prove that human skill had not diminished during centuries of peace. The capital ships held position, waiting for the right moment to unleash their devastating firepower. Admiral Cross coordinated everything from the Defiance, his decades of experience and training guiding every decision. Fleet Commander Stone managed tactical details, ensuring every ship knew its role and executed perfectly. Dr. Huang's strategies were being put into practice, and everyone hoped his analysis of Kryn weaknesses was accurate. Commander Thel watched the human formations begin their attack and felt cold certainty settle in her chest. She had tried to warn Vorak that humanity was more dangerous than he believed. Now he would learn that lesson the hard way, and she feared the cost would be measured in thousands of Kryn lives. She prepared herself for a battle that suddenly seemed far less certain than her chancellor believed. The fleets closed toward engagement range. Sensors locky. The Kryn fleet advanced in traditional battle formation, ships arranged in lines designed to concentrate firepower on specific targets. It was doctrine that had served them well for generations, overwhelming opponents with superior numbers and disciplined coordination. Chancellor Vorak watched from the Dominion's bridge as his 300 warships closed toward the human defensive positions. Victory seemed inevitable, just a matter of time before human resistance collapsed under Kryn might. The human fleet did not wait passively for the enemy to arrive. Admiral Cross ordered carrier groups to launch their strike craft while the Kryn were still at extreme range. Thousands of fighters and bombers poured from their carriers in coordinated waves, forming attack patterns that would have been impossible for less experienced pilots. The small craft accelerated toward the Kryn formation at speeds capital ships could never match, closing the distance in minutes. Kryn point defense systems activated automatically as human strike craft entered range. Defensive fire created webs of energy across space, attempting to destroy the incoming attackers. But human pilots had trained for exactly this scenario. They weaved through defensive fire with skill that came from centuries of refined combat doctrine. Losses occurred but remained minimal. The strike craft pressed their attack with determination that surprised their opponents. Fighter squadrons targeted weapons platforms and shield generators on Kryn warships, using precision fire to disable specific systems. Their weapons were smaller than ship-mounted guns but far more accurate at close range. Bombers followed behind the fighters, delivering heavy munitions to the weakened areas. The combination was devastatingly effective. Within the first 10 minutes of combat, 12 Kryn warships were disabled or destroyed, their systems crippled by attacks they had not anticipated. Commander Zarathel watched the disaster unfolding and urged Chancellor Vorak to adjust tactics. The humans were not fighting the expected battle. They needed to adapt to spread formation and provide mutual support. But Vorak refused to change his plan. He ordered the fleet to maintain formation and push forward. The human strike craft would eventually run out of ammunition and be forced to withdraw. Then Kryn superiority would assert itself through sheer firepower. Captain Lisa Grant commanded the Valiant as her destroyer group engaged the Kryn left flank. The human destroyers were faster and more maneuverable than their enemies, using speed to strike and fade before heavy weapons could target them effectively. Lieutenant Sam Torres coordinated targeting with other destroyers, ensuring their combined fire overwhelmed individual Kryn shields. The tactics were working perfectly. Enemy ships fell to concentrated attacks while the human vessels remained mostly undamaged, but the Kryn were not incompetent. They began adapting to human tactics despite Vorak's rigid orders. Some captains broke formation independently, creating smaller groups that could respond faster to attacks. These units proved more effective, forcing human ships to work harder for every victory. The battle evolved from one-sided slaughter to genuine combat, with both sides suffering casualties. Admiral Cross watched the battle develop from the Defiance and recognized the moment when capital ships needed to engage. He ordered the battle line forward, bringing humanity's heaviest weapons into range of the Kryn main force. The human capital ships were individually more powerful than their Kryn counterparts, mounting weapons that could crack planetary shields. When they opened fire, the effect was immediate and terrible. Beams of concentrated energy lanced across space, striking Kryn vessels with precision that demonstrated superior targeting systems. Human weapons were not just powerful but accurate, hitting weak points that maximized damage. Shields failed under sustained bombardment. Hulls ruptured as internal systems overloaded. The Kryn lines began to falter as ship after ship was disabled or destroyed by the methodical advance of human capital ships. Chancellor Vorak realized too late that his assumptions about human weakness were catastrophically wrong. He had expected quick victory against an inferior force. Instead, his fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that combined superior technology with centuries of refined combat doctrine. Pride would not allow him to retreat, but tactics demanded something change. He made a desperate decision that sealed his fate. Vorak ordered his flagship to lead a direct assault on the Defiance. He believed that destroying the human flagship would break their morale and coordination. If he could eliminate Admiral Cross, the human defense would collapse. It was the thinking of someone who had never faced a truly capable opponent, someone who believed leadership was more important than discipline and training. The Kryn culture emphasized individual authority. Vorak could not imagine a military force that functioned effectively even after losing its commander. The Dominion led a strike group of 30 warships directly toward the human flagship. It was a bold move that might have worked against a less prepared enemy. But Admiral Cross had anticipated exactly this type of desperate action. He had positioned forces specifically to exploit such an attack. As the Dominion committed to its assault, Human ships that had been holding back in reserve suddenly emerged from concealed positions. The Kryn strike group found itself surrounded by human capital, ships and cruisers that had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Vorak's force was cut off from the main fleet, outnumbered in the local engagement despite overall Kryn numerical superiority. The trap closed with devastating efficiency. Within minutes, half the Kryn strike group was disabled or destroyed. The Dominion itself came under concentrated fire from multiple directions. Commander Thel pleaded with Chancellor Vorak to order evacuation and surrender. The battle was lost, she argued, and continuing to fight would only waste Kryn lives for no purpose. But Vorak refused to accept defeat. He ordered maximum firepower, believing that Kryn determination would overcome the tactical situation. The Dominion's weapons fired at full capacity, targeting the Defiance with everything available. The human flagship's shields absorbed punishment that would have destroyed most vessels. Human engineering and defensive systems proved their worth as the Defiance maintained structural integrity, despite concentrated enemy fire. Then Admiral Cross ordered return fire. The Defiance's main batteries, weapons designed to destroy fortified positions, focused on a single target. The volley punched through the Dominion's weakened shields and tore massive holes in the hull. Secondary explosions rippled through the Kryn flagship as power systems failed and ammunition stores detonated. Commander Thel acted without waiting for Vorak's permission. She ordered immediate evacuation and broadcast surrender to the human fleet. Most of her officers supported the decision, having watched enough crew members die for Vorak's pride. They restrained their chancellor physically when he tried to countermand the surrender order. Escape pods began launching from the dying flagship as the crew abandoned ship. Admiral Cross accepted the surrender and ordered ceasefire on the Dominion. Human ships moved to assist with rescue operations, recovering Kryn survivors from their damaged vessels. The sight of humans saving enemy lives even during combat affected many Kryn officers profoundly. They had expected ruthless enemies but found warriors who valued life even in war. With their flagship destroyed and their commander captured, the remaining Kryn fleet lost all coordination. Some ships attempted to retreat, while others fought on individually. Admiral Cross broadcast terms to all enemy vessels: surrender immediately, and all prisoners would be treated according to established conventions of warfare. Continue fighting and face total destruction. He gave them 1 hour to decide. Commander Thel, now the ranking Kryn officer, made the decision her pride-blinded chancellor could not. She ordered all remaining Kryn forces to power down weapons and submit to human custody. The battle that had begun with such certainty of Kryn victory ended in complete defeat. Of the 300 warships that entered the Sol system, over 100 were destroyed or permanently disabled. The rest surrendered intact. Human losses were remarkably light considering the scale of engagement. A few destroyers suffered heavy damage and several dozen strike craft were lost, but no capital ships were destroyed, and total casualties numbered in hundreds rather than thousands. The victory demonstrated not just human military capability, but the effectiveness of 3 centuries of preserved combat knowledge combined with advanced technology. News of the battle spread across the galaxy at light speed. Species that had feared humanity's hidden power now understood why it had been hidden. The sleeping giant had awakened, and the result was devastating for those who had forced the awakening. The Kryn Empire, which had dominated galactic military affairs for generations, was humbled in a single engagement. The balance of power shifted in hours. The Assembly of Worlds convened an emergency session. Chancellor Vorak was brought before them to face justice for unauthorized military aggression. Commander Thel testified about his true intentions, admitting that the inspection and ultimatum were pretexts for seizing human technology. Many delegates who had supported the original disarmament resolution now expressed regret. Fear had made them complicit in aggression, and they could no longer pretend otherwise. Ambassador Claire M.,